So we are going to start this evening's program. It is just a few minutes after 6:30, and thank you everyone. While we just needed a few moments to upload to YouTube and get the recording started. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Patty Smolin. I am your business liaison librarian with the Schaumburg Township District Library. And tonight's program, we are welcoming Karen Chan to us again, and we are so pleased, and she will be bringing to us, the topic is recognizing and preventing financial fraud. How you can protect yourself against financial fraud. And Karen will teach us about the types of fraud being reported to the FTC, and she will also share steps to avoid becoming a victim, including protection, recognizing, and disengaging from fraudsters. Also discover effective ways to protect your private information. So over to the right is our chat, and I'm going to put in my name and email address. So if you have any questions that you would like to direct to a reference librarian in regards to library materials or services or sources, please share them with me. You are also most welcome to contact any of our reference librarians at the reference desk. We are available to help you 7 days a week, and you can call us, you can chat, you can please come by and visit us, because the library is open from 9 to 8 weekdays, 9 to 5 on Saturday, and 12 to 5 on Sunday. So Karen will be addressing questions, and if you would like to enter them in the Q&A or the chat, I will be monitoring them, and then periodically we may take a pause or wait for those questions to be addressed at the end, depending on what she's covering at the time. So I will leave it to Karen just to take a pause and let me know if she wants to address those questions midway through or stay to the end. But either way, please submit them as you have them, and we will stop and review them then. Karen, I want to say thank you so very much for coming back to our library. It's been a pleasure to work with you through the years, through different economic situations, through different political climates, through different markets, all of which you have helped me and our patrons navigate through. We benefited from the good times, and we've endured the not so good times. So thank you for bringing a very important topic to us tonight.
Thank you, Patty. It's always a pleasure. And I'm gonna be a little honest with our viewers. She's kind enough to still say those things after I had tonight's program down for 7 o'clock, and she had to call me about 10 minutes ago and say, "Karen, are you coming on?" So I'm glad to still be in Patty's good graces, and I really am happy to be here. So give me just one moment while I get my slides going live here.
I would just have to come up with 30 minutes of good, entertaining content for our patrons. And I don't know how I would do on the spot with that. I'm going to mute my own self and my video, but I am still here participating and learning.
All right, so you should be seeing the first slide of my presentation, and I have to tell you, I was so happy when I found this graphic. It's like he was just perfect. I assume it's a he, for our topic tonight. You know, I first taught this program a little over, not quite a year ago, I guess it is, not quite a year ago, and I have been amazed at the changes in the area of financial frauds and scams over the last 6 months to a year that have made this even more important than I had anticipated. So I'm glad you're here with me to talk about this tonight. Patty told you a little bit about me. Let me just fill in a bit more. I've actually been doing personal finance education for 27 years now. It's been quite a ride. And during that time, early on, I got my certified financial planner designation so I could do a more in-depth job of talking about some of the important personal finance issues that we face. But I do not practice, meaning that I do not take clients. Instead, I use that knowledge strictly to provide education. And I do not now, nor have I ever sold any products or services. And so my goal is to give you the most unbiased information that I can. So what is the size of the problem where we're talking about deceptions and frauds and scams? The Federal Trade Commission, in collaboration with the Better Business Bureau and others, collects reports not just of frauds, but they call it marketplace issues, which generally means, I think, misleading information. Here's what I was surprised to see when I found the most recent report that was just issued for 2020. They received 4.7 million complaints last year. And to put that in perspective, in 2019, it was just 3.2 million. What a huge increase in the course of a year. The scarier part is that out of those 2.2 million fraud reports, so you can see about half the reports that come in are actual fraud, 34% of those fraud reports resulted in a loss. $3.3 billion total reported. Now, from other sources, I have heard guesses as to what proportion of losses are actually reported. And so this 3.3 billion is probably a gross underestimate of the amount of money that this is costing all of us together. Something that you may be surprised by, we always hear about older individuals being the targets. But according to this report, younger people reported losing money to fraud more often than older people. However, when older people fall victim to fraud, the losses tend to be significantly more. So there is a lot at stake at both ends of the spectrum here. The top reported problems, I don't think you'll be surprised at these. Identity theft is number one right at 30%. And this includes what we have heard so much about here in Illinois, where we've had fraudulent applications for unemployment benefits. But of course, identity theft includes many other ways of stealing our identity as well. Imposter scams, though, they have dropped some, are still a big factor. And this includes when an individual is impersonating government, or they're pretending to be a romantic interest to lure you into a scam. The relative in distress phone calls, tech support scams, all of those things where an individual is pretending to be someone that they are not. And these result in a significant amount of losses as well, over 1 billion just with the imposter scams. The thing is, fraud can happen to anyone. It's best if none of us think that we are fraud proof, because there's always someone who is an astute individual who will be taken and provides a lesson to the rest of us that it really can happen to anyone. I'm going to share just a few examples of people I know personally who have been victims of one type of fraud or another. The first one is a 14-year-old that I know. The scam took place when she was just 13. She plays online games like I suppose every other, preteen who has access to a phone or a computer. In the game, she had won or done an achievement where she received this glowing skateboard. That's literally what the thing was that she won in the game, a virtual item, obviously, a glowing skateboard. It was no longer available. So now it's limited supply, right? Supply and demand. In this game, you trade things, and somebody indicated an interest in trading, but they said before they would do the trade, they had to actually see the item. Well, to see the item, she had to actually give them access, which meant they took it. They literally stole this glowing skateboard from her inside the game. Virtual situation, 13-year-old, scams abound. Another friend of mine, in his early 70s, turns his computer on one day and is informed that everything on his computer is encrypted. And if he ever wants to see any of his information again, he has to pay some, ransom amount to this unknown entity so that they will then allow his data to be unencrypted. Little did they know they chose the wrong person. He stores nothing on his computer. It's a streaming service for him to listen to symphonies and so forth out of Europe. He did not pay. He didn't care. Lucky for him, not lucky for the scammers. And then the phone call. Grandma? Tony, is that you? Yes, I'm in Miami on spring break. I thought you weren't going anywhere this year. Mom told me not to, but I came anyway, and everything's gotten stolen. I need money to get back to school before I'm expelled. Please, you got to wire me money, and you can't tell Mom. My sister has a relative on her husband's side of the family, older woman, obviously probably not only a grandmother, probably a great-grandmother, known in the family as somebody who has always been at the top of her game. But she was taken by one of these grandparent or grandchild scams. I think it was $10,000 that she ended up losing. To her credit, she admitted it and told everyone what had happened in an effort to educate. And then the thing that's happened so much, not only in Illinois, but in California and many other states over this past year, as unemployment has skyrocketed. A friend of mine, not named Maria, but a friend of mine at work one day, the employer's HR office calls her up and says, Maria, can you tell me why you applied for unemployment insurance when you still work here? Well, clearly it was a fraudulent application done in her name. In this case, because she was currently employed, her employer knew about it before she did. But these are all the kinds of things that we encounter. You know, the fraudsters have a toolbox that they draw from, and they're so good at this because they do it 24/7. They gather and glean personal information from data breaches and hacks, and from that data being sold on the dark web, but also from Facebook games where you answer seemingly innocuous questions, from applications you do on web pages that appear to be legitimate but are not. They often appear to be legitimate organizations, maybe by spoofing, which means using a phone number that doesn't belong to them. I've gotten phone calls that said they were from my local hospital, but they weren't. I've gotten phone calls that said they were from what looks to be like the house down the street because of the phone number, but it's not. Today, with the right technology, a scammer can pretend to be whoever they want to as far as the phone number that is presented to you. They set up fraudulent versions of real websites, which are very difficult to tell from the real thing. They use email addresses that are similar to real companies. And so between the fact that they know so much about you before they reach out, and they may appear to be from a legitimate, respectable organization, they can often dupe just about anyone. And they adapt with the times. For example, once the pandemic started and so many of us were ordering even more online than we were before, we began to see a new scam using text messaging, where they indicate that there's a package that you've ordered that you've missed, and they tried to deliver and they can't. And they give you a link where you're supposed to go to, request for them to come back and deliver this package. This was so new just 9 months ago that even a colleague of mine who teaches on this same subject was almost taken in, because she said, yeah, we've ordered a bunch of stuff. Would I really know if one thing had not arrived? But she was wise enough to do some investigating before she thought about clicking, and she did not click. Other reasons that fraud works is that today with email and texting and robocalls, there's such a low cost to reach massive numbers of people. They don't need a high success rate. They only need a few. They've also got the psychology down. For instance, in the grandparent scam, such an emotional reaction, especially when maybe they've already seen your grandchild's Facebook page or their Twitter feed or their Instagram account. They already know that actually he is in Miami for spring break. Maybe he even told his friends he wasn't supposed to be there. They may already know all of this stuff. But they also play on the typical emotions that put us at risk of greed and fear, but also our respect for authority, which unfortunately also puts us at risk. As I said, they do this 24/7, so they're pros. And some of the frauds now are such that money could be gone before you even know anything happened. The good news is that we have some tools in our toolbox too. So we're going to focus tonight on protecting, avoiding, recognizing and disengaging, and then ways to report and get help. One of the values of reporting is so that federal authorities in particular have information about what's going on, so that even though they may not be able to help you in particular, they may be able to go after scammers and hold them accountable, helping larger numbers of people, because individually we've taken the time to report what's going on. So let's talk about protecting. And here, what I'm thinking about is reducing the likelihood that there's going to be damage if you encounter a fraud or a scam, and reducing the amount of damage that could occur if you are defrauded. And some of these things we all know, but we don't always practice them. Top of the list is keeping your technology up to date. That means not just your computer and your tablet, but your phone, the router for your Wi-Fi as well. And not just updating your operating system on these devices, but any apps that you're using, as well as keeping up to date, properly operating antivirus and security programs. I have in the past happened across the fact that even though I had antivirus software installed on my computer, it wasn't always running when I had told it to run. And so we have to keep monitoring these kinds of things. Other things we can protect include setting alerts on our financial accounts so that we receive a text or a phone call or an email when certain types of activity have taken place there. We can delete unused accounts so that those account logins and passwords are not floating around, perhaps in relatively unsecure places, to be snatched up and used by scammers. And this is a particular issue if you, not wisely, reuse passwords from one account to another. Another way to protect yourself, making backups of anything that's on your computer. And nowadays, that backup should probably be offline, because if it is connected to your computer and let's say that you get ransomware on your laptop, likely it's not only going to encrypt your laptop, it's going to encrypt the external hard drives you have attached to it, and your backup will then be of no use to you. And then actually encrypting your files yourself is one of the latest recommendations. And this I actually just read in the February 2021 article in Consumer Reports. So the most recent article from Consumer Reports that you'd be able to access through your library, can probably access the digital version of that article also through your library's database subscriptions. There's a little bit to know about how to use encryption on Windows versus Mac computers, and they give real nice instructions there. And of course, the gold standard of protection is passwords. First of all, using them. I won't ask you to raise hands, but my guess is that some of you are guilty, as I was for a long time, of having a smartphone that is not password protected or fingerprint protected. Passwords should be unique, they should be difficult, and they should be long. And what that means is that, of course, they're very hard for us individually to remember. That means that most of us at some point are probably going to decide that unless we're going to carry around the little cheat sheet notebook with us everywhere, we're going to have to use a special piece of software called a password manager. Password managers work like a vault where we store all of our other login information and other sensitive information. It does more, though, than just store that information. When you're using a password manager, and let's say you open up your computer, the password manager application is on your computer, you go to a web page that requires a login, your password manager will likely prompt you that they will autofill that information if you like. Not only does it mean that it gets filled accurately without typos. It also means that if there should be a nasty little piece of software on your computer called keystroke or key tracker software, if you type in your login and password by yourself manually, that keystroke tracker can collect that information so that they now know the login and password that you're using. The password manager can generate new passwords for you as well. And before this most recent article about security in Consumer Reports, they had a previous article specifically about password managers, which will tell you which ones they thought rated very well, tell you the free versions versus the pay versions and that sort of thing. You can find other reviews online as well. Like PC Magazine often does good reviews of this sort, but Consumer Reports is always sort of the gold standard because we know that they accept no payment from any of the companies whose products they evaluate. And now something that I learned that I was 100% wrong about when I pulled together this program last year. You've probably had the experience. You go to some new place that you need to log in. And let's just say that I've stumbled across this webpage called Grandma's Pecan Pies. And I've decided that I want to order one of Grandma's Pecan Pies. And to do that, I have to set up a new login, so that I can place my order. And often you'll be prompted, would you like to use your Microsoft login? Would you like to use your Google login? How about your Facebook login? And I naively thought that meant that Grandma's Pecan Pies was going to have access to my Microsoft, Google, or Facebook login information. I didn't want that. So of course I said no, and I set up my own little individual username and password for Grandma's Pecan Pies. Well, I was mistaken. What this actually does is the new site never sees the login information that you use to log into Microsoft, Google, or Facebook. Instead, you would be directed to that login if you're not already logged into Microsoft, Google, or Facebook. When you log in there or when you give them permission, Facebook or whoever doesn't send your login information, but they send a token back to grandmaspecanpies.com that will verify my identity, telling them to let me in without ever giving them any of my login information. One of the nice things about this is, let's say that I get that pie and it really was not worth ever ordering again. Therefore, I do not need this account any longer. Maybe Grandma's Pecan Pies is not very sophisticated and they don't even have a way for me to cancel my account. That means that login and password could be floating around out there, probably easily hacked, for years. If I had used a master login, which is what we'll call these Microsoft or Google or Facebook logins. If I'd used a master login, all I would need to do is to go back to Microsoft or whoever and cancel the authorization that I had given for them to send information to Grandma's Pecan Pies. No need to actually cancel the account, just deny and revoke access through the master password. And you can take passwords and kick it up a notch, as Emerald Lagasse used to say. You can use two-factor authentication for logging into accounts, particularly sensitive accounts, which I would include both social media accounts and financial accounts, meaning that in addition to your password, which would be one factor, you will have to provide a second factor, a second piece of information before you'll be able to log into this account, in particular when you're logging in from a device that they don't recognize. You've probably seen things like the message I'm showing you here when you log into an account, particularly at a bank or an investment type of thing. Karen, you can increase your protection against account hacking. Turn on two-factor authentication. We'll ask you for a code if we see a login from a device we don't recognize. It takes a minute to get used to, but once you've started using two-factor authentication, it's really not that big of a deal, especially if you're already accustomed to keeping your cell phone right there with you all the time. let's say that I'm at my own computer. I get this message. I go through the steps to tell this provider, let's say that this is my bank. I go through the steps to tell my bank first that, yeah, the computer I'm on is safe. You don't have to worry about this computer, and it's mine. But if I log in from anywhere else, send a code to, and I can give them my cell phone number for texts. I can give them my landline number, and they'll call with an automated recording and give me a code, or I can give them an email address, and perhaps all three. So now if I'm at my sister's, I want to log into my bank account. I've never logged in from this computer before. I'll be prompted to request one of those codes, so that in addition to my password, I have to enter this additional piece of information, which it would be much less likely that a hacker would be able to access both of those pieces of data in order to log in and pretend to be me. All right, so that's protection. Now let's talk about avoiding. The nice thing about avoiding scams and fraudsters is that we've simply removed the risk that we're going to be taken. We'll never know for sure how many frauds or scams we have avoided contact with, but here are some of the proven ways to do it. In your email, if you get one of those lovely junk email messages that you know is it's spam, you don't actually know it's scams maybe, and your first reaction is to unsubscribe, but actually what you'd rather do is report that message to your email provider as spam or junk. Sometimes it's a simple right click on the message and choosing the option, this is spam, this is junk. That means that that sender will not be allowed to send messages that come through to you any longer. You're also educating the email provider about how to recognize current spam emails. And on your phone, whether it's cell phone or landline, nowadays it's almost imperative that we all figure out a way that we're going to screen calls. Now, I used to think that caller ID was a luxury. I no longer really think that. It seems to be pretty necessary to avoiding scammers today. So looking at the number that is calling, and hopefully you've loaded your contacts so that it won't just tell you the number, but it will tell you the name of the person if it's one of the people that you actually have in your records. That gives you some reassurance that it's somebody you really want to answer. But you can also do this the old-fashioned way. You can have a regular old physical answering machine hooked up to your landline so that you can listen to the beginning of the message that the person begins to leave. And if it's somebody you want to speak to, you do the old thing of then you run and grab the phone and say, hello, I'm here, now that you know it's somebody you want to speak with. Another way is to prevent these calls of even coming through to you using some type of a robocall, meaning a robotic call blocking service. One of the ones that's commonly referenced is NomoRobo. Depending on how you have your phone service will determine oftentimes what types of apps are available to you. On your cell phone, you'll be able to have your choice probably of apps that would help with blocking. If you have a landline, you may be limited to the ones that work compatibly with your provider, and it may be different depending on if your provider is actually voice over internet, like if you're getting your phone through your cable company, or if you're in a traditional landline that actually has a special line coming up to your house. How about avoiding frauds and spams on social media? The main thing here is to make use of the privacy settings that you have control of on each of your accounts, where you limit and say, only people can see my information. People can only see my information if I am connected to them, I am friended with them, or what have you. Now, in my case, it gets a little involved because there are times when I post things that I want to be accessible to any and everyone. For instance, there was a post on Facebook earlier this week. Someone was giving well-intended advice about setting up IRAs for young children, but they were missing some critical information and was going to cause people a lot of headaches. That was something that when I responded to that, I wanted it available to any and everyone. So for that message, I could change it to public. But then the next time I post, I have to be very careful that I go back and say, no, from now on, go back to only let people see this who are friends or friends of friends. Also, even if you have good privacy settings, it's generally not a good idea to post anything that reveals personal information. I may talk about my cat, but I don't use his name. I may talk about my spouse, but I don't use his name either. I don't, my anniversary, my birthday, none of that stuff is in my profile. And I never make mention that I'm away from home. Just about 2 weeks ago, family in my neighborhood was out of town overnight. I've forgotten what the event was. Their young teenager posted on Instagram, "Oh, mom and dad and I are over here overnight having such fun." Well, when they came home, their house had been broken into. Clearly, the person saw it on Instagram, knew they were gone. And avoid all of those surveys that keep asking you about this or that. There have been some more interesting ones, but the example that I was able to capture when I was thinking about this was you were challenged to find a picture of all the cars you've owned throughout your life, and they had to be the right make, model, and color. Oh my gosh. Do you know that this is what you can be asked as a security question when you set up your Social Security account? You do not want this kind of information out there. And then with web searches themselves, most of us think we're good at knowing when we're going to a legit website and when we aren't, but it's actually very difficult to tell. Sometimes your antivirus or your malware protection software may include a feature where they will flag the results in your web searches to tell you whether this is like a verified site or whether this is an unverified site or whether this is really a bad site. You for sure don't want to go here. So the green check mark that you see would be its way of saying this is a good site. If you saw a red circle there with an X in it, clearly that would mean you don't want to go to this one. Aside from knowing whether it's a legitimate or a verified website or not, you also, especially if you're going to be providing any information, you want to know that the site itself is secured. And you know that by the traditional things of either seeing the lock that is closed or seeing the HTTPS. The S will tell you that it is secure. Nowadays, in the URL, it may not even display the HTTPS, and so you need to train yourself to look for that lock. You know, is it locked or not? And sometimes there will simply be a message to the right of the URL saying that this site is not secure. And finally, with online purchases, most of us have quite a lot of experience with this. You probably have providers you use on a regular basis. You're not worried about them. Shopping with familiar companies is a reliable way to do your online purchasing. But if you are purchasing somewhere that it's like, I haven't ever bought here before, think they're okay, but not sure, well then, if you have a PayPal account, use it to make the purchase so that your credit card information is not being input into this webpage that you're not familiar with. Or some credit cards will give you one-time use numbers that you can use in those kinds of situations. Watch for the check boxes that may ask you to give them permission to save your credit card number. I don't think everybody does this, but many sites now do give you the option to save or not. Personally, I never save payment information. I would much rather enter it myself, or sometimes your password manager will autofill that kind of information for you as well. You don't need to type it in. Also, you have stronger protections if you make purchases with a credit card instead of a debit card if something goes wrong. With a debit card, the money will already be out of your checking account and you're at the mercy of the bank, not at their mercy, but there will be some steps to go through and some time involved in getting the money back, even if it was fraudulent. With a credit card, generally it's simply a dispute of the item on the statement. You are not responsible for that unless or until it is resolved and determined to be legitimate. And of course, look for those secure connections, the closed padlocks, to make sure that you're purchasing on a secure web page. And one more thing about avoiding limiting access to your credit information is another way of preventing some bad things from happening. Fortunately, freezing our credit reports is now free as of about 2 years ago. Unfreezing is free. Temporary thaws for purposes of letting a particular lender or insurance verification get done. Those are all free. And what happens when you freeze your credit reports is no data is going to be released to new creditors. They can't verify anything about you. Therefore, they will not open a new credit account. And I'll show you how that helps someone toward the end of our program tonight. Your current accounts, your current lenders will still be able to check your credit history. I guess they're considered sort of verified users in this case. And but no new creditors are going to be able to access your information. If a freeze seems a little too intrusive or too bothersome, maybe you're at a point in your life when you are, shopping for mortgages, applying for credit cards from time to time, maybe thinking of replacing your car in the not too distant future. Freezing and unfreezing has actually become very streamlined. It happens pretty much in real time. So those really aren't problems any longer. But nonetheless, if you'd rather do something a little less drastic or less thorough, probably be the right word, you can put a fraud alert on your credit reports. Anyone can put an initial 1-year fraud alert. You do not need to be a victim of identity theft. You just say, I want a fraud alert. If you have been a victim, if your information has been compromised, you'll need to provide that documentation as a part of requesting to have an extended fraud alert that will last for 7 years put on your accounts. The same law that made freezes free also required the credit reporting agencies to give dedicated websites and phone numbers where we can do all of these things: freezing, unfreezing, requesting a fraud alert, and in some cases even asking to opt out of having our information sold, which results in us getting all of these pre-approved credit card applications in the mail. So with freezes, you'll need to contact each of these 3 credit reporting agencies. With fraud alerts, you only have to contact one, and by law, they must then forward that information to the other 2. So let's move now to the situation where we did our best, to protect and to avoid, but something happens. How do we spot it before we get taken advantage of? There are a number of red flags. Some of them are a little new. For example, if anybody asks you to make a payment to them in Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency, that is a red flag. It is not exclusively, but cryptocurrency really is the domain of shady business. And the fact that somebody would ask you to pay them with that indicates that something shady is going on here. And even if they ask you to send a wire transfer or to buy a prepaid debit card and send it to them, or similarly to buy a gift card and send it to them, those are all indicators that this is not a legit transaction that you're getting engaged with. Also, from time to time, this seems to come back. I haven't heard much about it recently, but if you get oftentimes sort of generic messages via text or email or through Facebook Messenger or any messaging application like that, if you get messages from someone that you don't regularly hear from, especially if there's an attachment or it's asking you to click on a link, take a step back, really think about this. Would someone that you haven't heard from in 5 years send you a message that says, hey, thought you'd like to see this, click here? I don't think so. And even if it is your friend, are you going to lose the friendship because you didn't click on something they sent you? Probably not. If it really is a friend, reach out to them yourself and say, did you send me a message like this? Also, anytime you're being threatened, if people are using intimidation with you and high pressure, things like, well, if you don't do this, your Social Security payments are going to stop. If you don't do this, you'll be arrested. If you don't do this, we're going to freeze your account. These are all threats and intimidation, and typically not things that the real organizations would ever say to you. And the final red flag in my book is when somebody says, it's a secret. This is for you only. Don't tell anyone. It's an opportunity for a limited select few individuals. Another red flag. Doesn't guarantee that it's a scam, but it really raises the likelihood. So if we do encounter any of these things, the best thing we can do is walk away, disengage. You hang up the phone call as soon as you realize it's a robocall or somebody's trying to sell you something. You open up a website and suddenly either crazy stuff is going on or you're seeing stuff you don't want to see. Close the link, close the browser immediately. Don't sit there frozen like a deer in the headlights. Email, again, on the one hand, ignore email that looks like spam. In other words, don't respond to it. Typically don't use the unsubscribe function that might be attached to the email. Instead, report it as spam, the way I discussed earlier. If you get something in the mail that doesn't pass the smell test, just toss it. Get it off your desk. Don't let yourself look at it 3 times. When my father was older, this became an issue. He would see things that came that kind of sounded too good to be true, but 2 things were going on. You know, they were playing on greed. Typically, we all have some greed in us, so he was susceptible to that. But his mental functions weren't 100% of what they were in his younger days. He would leave this mail sitting around, so he would look at it time and time again. And every time he looked at it, it increased the likelihood that he was going to say yes and fill it out and write the check and be taken for whatever it was that they were trying to do. And if you get those friend requests where I think I'm already friended with this person, why am I getting another friend request? Probably because it's a scam. Just delete the request. Don't try to do anything with it. And this was also something that was new to me last year when I was working on this program. I think it's useful information. If you're in the process of doing something, responding to a request for money, a sales offer, whatever it is, if you're responding to it and in the process, someone else tries to intervene and get you to stop, you might want to pay attention. In a survey of people who reported scams to the Better Business Bureau scam tracker, 20% of those who actually were engaged, meaning talking with or corresponding with the scam, said that someone tried to intervene and stop them from losing money. In some cases, these were the bank tellers where the person went in to get the money order, not money order, probably the cashier's check, or to withdraw substantial amounts of cash. It might have been the cashiers at the grocery store where they were buying the Green Dot prepaid debit card. It might have been the agents at the wire transfer, the MoneyGram store, where they could tell that something wasn't quite right, and they tried to talk the person out of completing the transaction. Half of the people who got to that point listened and avoided the scam. That also tells us that half of the people didn't listen to the people who were trying to intervene and save them from themselves, and they ended up losing money. And the other thing to remember here is that the scammer is often going to coach you to try to make it less likely that intervention will happen. They'll tell you, now, if somebody says this to you, they're just jealous. They're going to give you reasons to discount what other people will say to you when they're trying to help. So I think this was one of my ahas as I was learning more about this. And so final technique that we're going to talk about, but then I have a story to tell you at the end. You should report what you experience, and there are going to be times when you need help. The first and foremost thing to remember, though, is to document everything. As soon as you think something isn't right, start taking notes, dates, times, names, phone numbers, the whole 9 yards. So let's say that you realize you gave some information, maybe on a website, maybe in response to an email, whatever, and now you're starting to realize it could have been a scammer. Maybe I gave some information that could be used to steal my identity. Maybe they're setting me up for fraud. Then go to identitytheft.gov. This is a service of the Federal Trade Commission. They'll have you answer questions about what happened. They're actually going to create a recovery plan for you. Now, it's based on the information you input. It's not like there's a person, live person guiding you, but it's pretty well done. You'll be able to print your report of the situation that you're complaining about, and you'll be able to print your recovery plan that has steps lined out for you to take to reduce the chance that you're going to have problems going down the road. It's your choice if you want to create an account. There may be some additional information and help available to you there, so that the system would actually kind of walk you through the steps that they're recommending that you take, and you'll be able to check things off, and it will track, oh, you already did this. It won't show you that one again. It'll help you pre-fill forms and letters that you might need, for example, for a police report, to document to the credit reporting agencies that you have been a victim of identity theft and those sorts of things. The plan that you're given could include everything from freezing your credit reports to how to call and talk to the companies where your accounts were affected, how to freeze financial accounts and other types of accounts, guidelines for changing logins and password, even helping you understand how to go about filing a police report, or something which is kind of extreme, actually, if it should be a situation where you need to do something as demanding as replacing a government ID. I have yet another friend who was a victim of a scam where they actually had a fraudulent passport in his name, and it resulted in him having to have his passport reissued. So it does happen, not common, but it happens. If you don't want to set up an account, you will still be able to access the checklists in the recovery plan for yourself. And again, these will be things that will be tailored to the situation you described, things that will help based on your particular experience and what you may be at risk for. If you should become aware that someone has filed for unemployment in your name, here are 2 URLs that you would want to use on the Illinois Department of Employment Security webpage. One is where you actually do the reporting of the identity theft, where someone's claimed benefits in your name. The other is more informational. What might be an indicator that this is happening? What should you do if you, for instance, if you get a debit card from the Illinois Department of Employment Security, and that's an indicator that somebody is getting benefits in your name, they may be trying to siphon those funds off even though the card went to you. Do not activate the card if that happens. Hopefully this will be on the downswing now, but this was the scam that I heard the most about over the past year. That's why I'm dedicating that page specifically to that. And now a new resource, or relatively new, that I highly recommend. I went in and played around with this some, and I think it's going to do some of the same things that the previous tool from the Federal Trade Commission would do at identitytheft.org. But this tool is currently provided by Consumer Reports. They actually, I don't know if they bought it, obtained it in some fashion. the University of Toronto had this tool developed, and it's now being provided free to the general public by Consumer Reports, where you can get personalized guidance about whatever your security or identity theft concerns are. You start out by telling it things like, what kinds of equipment do you use? And it's got everything from the connected doorbells to all sorts of stuff on here. So you tell it all the types of connected devices that you use. Then you tell it what you're concerned about. Are you concerned about ransomware and viruses? Are you concerned about keeping communications private, phishing, whatever? And you can see here that there are more scales here, more pieces that you could choose. I was trying to make it legible on the size screen that we have. Once you've told those two things, then it asks you for one last thing, which of these statements sound like your concerns, and then it will give you a list of to-do items. It will flag the most important one. And with the information that I submitted, it said that the most important thing that I needed to do was to enable multi-factor or two-factor authentication. And the second was get a password manager. Already did that one. And I do have multi-factor authentication on some accounts. I should go put it on more. This will encourage me to do that. So I'm going to end with a case study. This is a true story. It's a story about a friend of mine, and she knows that I'm using her in our class tonight. She's one of the people that has created one of these cute little avatars that she can do fun things with on her phone. And so I even asked her, I said, can you create an avatar for me to use? Because it'd just be great, you know, that I know I've really got you there looking at me. So this is what she sent me. And I thought it was so apropos. It's how she felt, you know, being in this vortex and her screaming out loud, this is not happening. So what did happen? Well, actually, let me tell you, and then we'll talk about what we can learn from it. Monday morning, she gets a phone call from her financial advisor. And I'm just going to call her Mary. It's not her name. Mary, did you initiate some transfers of money out of your account to some bank in Oklahoma over the weekend? No, of course not. Why? Well, there are two requests here to transfer money to this bank in Oklahoma. Well, somebody was trying to siphon money out of her accounts. So she's on the phone with the financial planner. With many financial advisors, many financial planners, they are providing the guidance and working with you, but the money, your accounts are, it's called being custodied. They are in custody with a third party like Schwab or TD Ameritrade, although your advisor is not associated with them. That's actually a good protection. But at any rate, financial advisor gets, I think in this case it was Schwab, gets a person from Schwab on the phone. So now they got a three-way conversation going, and she's having to verify, yes, you know, here's all the information you need to know that I am who I say I am. No, I did not authorize these transactions. And so the first step would have been to stop these individual transactions. They had to do that before they could freeze her account. Of course, freezing the account would prevent any additional transactions from being submitted. But the scammers were so on the ball. By the time they got the first transaction canceled, another one showed up. And by the time they got it canceled, yet another one showed up. And she joked and said that apparently the scammer eventually had to go to the bathroom, and there was a gap long enough between transfer requests that they were able to get all of the transfer requests canceled and then freeze the account so that no further transactions like that could be requested. So she's like, you know, wiping the sweat off her brow. Boy, we dodged a bullet there. That's great. And then she gets a phone call from her bank again, or maybe it was an email alert from the bank about a transaction that didn't sound quite right to her. So she calls the bank. Now, mind you, this was in the early days of the pandemic when we were in full lockdown. it was determined that there was something going on with her bank account, but they needed her to be there in person. Not sure why. She had to, wait at the door of the bank for them to come unlock it and let her in, and everybody's masked and sitting 6 feet apart and all this, and trying to figure out what's going on with these transfer requests from her bank account. So once again, canceling requests, freezing the account, opening a new account, transferring her funds over to it. And at this point, her head's just kind of spinning. It's like, what is going on? A day passes and nothing happens. In the meantime, she's been contacting proactively her other financial accounts and trying to beef up the security on them. And then the next day, she gets this very odd message. We're sorry to tell you that your request for a Walmart credit card has been declined. We were unable to access your credit information, and therefore we cannot approve your application. She's like, I didn't apply for any Walmart account. What the heck is going on? All right. She tries to make sure that anything else she's forgotten about is locked down, freezing her credit reports and so forth. Seems like everything's okay until the next week, and they hacked into her husband's accounts. This is the most astounding story of identity theft that I have heard of, beyond some of the really horrible ones where you got arrested because the person created a crime and identified themselves as you. But she was just beside herself. And I asked her, I said, how did it happen? And she said, as she talked to different people, they would mention things that might have led to it, but she doesn't really know. But clearly, they had information that they got from somewhere. Maybe it was from one or more of these data breaches that have happened over the past years, probably resulting in a lot of her personal information being sold on the dark web, and people could begin to, put together not just a couple of pieces of information, but maybe a significant amount of information about her that would enable them to do a more thorough job of identity theft. It's also possible that she had inadvertently downloaded some malware onto her computer, like that keystroke logger that I mentioned before, because that would explain why they had login information to more than one of her accounts. It's possible that she was caught in a phishing email where she was taken to a website that she didn't realize was fraudulent, and maybe she entered her own legitimate login information. A low-tech possibility, or a lower-tech possibility, would be that this was actually done by someone that she is physically in contact with and who had been in her home and had accessed her computer. We don't know. But she was honest. She said there were things that she had done and not done that made it worse. She was using simple passwords. She was reusing passwords across multiple accounts. And she had allowed her browser or web pages to save her login information. And when she was telling me this, we did a fairly extensive interview, as you can understand. She says, I admit to being stupid and lazy. These were the things that she was blaming herself for. But there were some things that she did well, too. She had alerts on that checking account so that when she saw an alert for a transaction that she didn't recognize, she knew something was wrong. She already had the freeze on her credit reports. That's why when somebody tried to open this Walmart credit card in her name, it was rejected, and the person was unable to get that card and go on a spending spree without being responsible for it. Not she individually, but the professional, the financial advisor that she was working with, did a good job. He apparently checks accounts every morning, as he was doing that Monday morning, recognized right away something that wasn't usual, didn't put it off, called her immediately, said that was taken care of. There was a substantial amount of money at risk there, and she was told that had the money successfully been transferred before it was stopped, she likely would never have seen that money again. She also responded quickly and diligently. She didn't wait to see what additional accounts they were going to get into. She froze them proactively. And she contacted those businesses where she had accounts, even though they hadn't been compromised yet, and worked with them to do what was needed to protect the accounts better. Now, she had some legal protections here. Let's say that there had been some, in the course of all this, that there had also been some fraudulent charges on her existing credit cards. The liability protections there are actually quite strong. The federal guideline, the federal law is maximum liability of $50 per card, zero liability if you report its loss or that it's been stolen before it's actually used. But the card issuers themselves go further. The banks almost across the board now give us $0 of liability in the case of fraud. With ATM and debit cards, though, the protections are quite different. If they're lost or stolen, you will have $0 of liability if you report it before the card is used. $50 if you report it within 2 business days of the time you learn that it was lost or stolen. But that goes up to $500 if it was more than 2 days before you get around to calling the bank, and unlimited if you report it after 60 days after the statement was sent that contained the fraudulent debits. And then if your debit card number was used, federal law gives you a little bit better protection here because they're assuming it wasn't necessarily you that goofed up here. But with federal law, $0 if reported within 60 days after the statement was sent. New credit accounts. This was a different category from obviously your existing credit cards and so forth. But let's say that Walmart card had been activated. Apparently that would have been covered under state law, which usually would give you $0 of liability, but obviously state laws are not consistent entirely across the country. And what about our investment and retirement accounts? I will tell you that I was actually stunned to learn that there is no federal law that protects us against losses due to fraud in these highly valuable accounts. However, the custodian of your account or the plan sponsor, if it's like an employer retirement account, they're going to have an individual policy about how fraud is handled. They may cover 100% of the loss from unauthorized activity, but they may have security requirements you will have had to meet to show that you did your due diligence in protecting this account. So that's an area where I think it's a little scary, which means that if you're going to use multi-factor authentication anywhere, this is probably your first target. Any retirement account or investment account that you have, because you have fewer protections or potentially fewer protections there than with anything else. All right, so we've traveled through protection strategies, avoidance strategies, recognizing and disengaging, reporting and getting help, and a case study that really, I think, for me at least, brings it home, and I hope it does for you as well. So I'm going to call on Patty to come back now and walk us through, because I know she's been looking at your questions. What do people want to know out there, Patty?
Well, they want to know a few things, Karen, and I'm not sure, because I do think I'm going to leave it to our patrons to determine if the questions that they asked early on were answered, but we do have a few of them.
Okay.
We have one patron who asks how, and she asked this early on, how safe are the password services that keep our passwords?
The password managers. They are actually viewed as being quite safe. To date, I do not think that there have been any actual hacks, meaning data obtained from them. Number one, they use the most sophisticated encryption for the storage. And now I am not, I'm not geeky enough that I thoroughly understand this, but what I think I understand is that typically the data file that would store your information would be stored in one location. The key, your password, is stored in a completely separate location. And so only when the key and the encrypted file come together is anybody going to be able to access information from that password manager. I'm not saying that it can't happen, but it hasn't happened to date. It is one of the reasons why I would read reviews, whether from Consumer Reports or other computer-related sources, to see reviews, who has the best security on them. And the password that you choose for your password manager should be a very difficult password. Yes, you need to be able to remember it, but it needs to be long and difficult, because everything could hinge on that, and you don't share it with anyone. A lot of the password manager tools now are set up where you can share through the password manager either certain pieces of information or certain folders of login information, for example, so that multiple people in your house don't have to keep track of the same information. You can actually have it stored so that one's not writing it down, and you've got it in the password manager. So I can't say that it will never happen, but so far password managers look like our best bet. Oh, and I will say this, and the alternative is to actually use your Google password, Facebook password, or Microsoft login and password, to use those as a master account on sites that offer you that opportunity. As I said, I was wrong about that. I thought it was increasing my risk if I did that. Indeed, it's lowering your risk. And those guys definitely have great security.
No, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I'd never discussed that issue, and I thought similarly as you did, and which is why I hesitated from going that route. And I would just create new passwords, instead of tapping into those, thinking that they were going to access.
Exactly. And I will tell you that the first place I read that it was okay, I wouldn't believe it until I had found some other authority that I trusted that said the same thing. And then I was finally like, okay, I've been ignorant about this. I will learn from these two people.
I'm very glad that you mentioned Consumer Reports, and I did include in the chat, and I want to make mention of it here. If we are your home library and you have a Schaumburg library card, you have remote access to Consumer Reports. You can also come into the library and look at hard copies of the magazines. They are able to be checked out, so the issue that you're looking for may or may not be in, but the online version of it is accessible remotely if you have a Schaumburg card. And if we are not your home library, please check if your home library has an e-subscription to Consumer Reports, and then you would be able to use that as well. And when I say access to Consumer Reports through your home library, know that that means go to your home library site first, see if they have Consumer Reports, and go in that way. You're not going to the Consumer Reports site, because that will, request that you pay for a subscription. Check and see what your library has paid for, subscribed to, and paid for as for your resident community, and go that route. And if you have any questions on that at all, contact your reference desk at either our library or your home library. I'm going to answer one question myself. This one I can handle. Is there a handout we can get from this program? Yes, and to all registered attendees for tonight's program, if you registered before 1 o'clock today, I sent out that handout. If for any reason you did not receive that handout, please email me. The name is Patty Smolin. I have my email address in the chat, psmolin@stdl.org. If you did not receive the handout, I will get one to you. Another question for you, Karen. I'll give you the tough ones. I'll just take the easy ones here. Why is unsubscribing a bad thing to do? Can it hurt you?
Yes, and thank you for asking. I should have explained that. The reason you don't unsubscribe is because if it is a scammer, it tells them they've got a live email address. Somebody is reading this account, and now they can sell your email address to a whole bunch of other scammers, and you may get inundated. That's the rationale behind not unsubscribing. Now, if it's a legitimate one, like we all do this, we buy something from a website, we start getting sale emails from them 5 times a week, and we want to get rid of those. Unsubscribing there is typically going to be a-okay. You know that it's a legitimate company. You just don't want to get all that inbox stuff. But with the ones that look questionable, that you're not sure they're legit, in those cases, report them as spam rather than unsubscribing, so that they don't they don't now harass you even more than ever.
Okay. We have 3 more questions left, just to give you an idea of what we're looking at. We do have a patron who's saying on an earlier slide, you have a link to checking out password managers. Can you show the slide again? Karen, while your program is up, if you could just move over to that slide, but also to that patron, if you receive the handout, that slide will be on your handout as well.
And okay. And I'm sorry, which link was it we were looking for?
Checking out password managers.
Password managers. Thank you. That's way back at the beginning. Oops. Okay, yeah, this is the password manager. And this is a bit.ly link because the real link was one of those long, awkward ones. And so that's why I went to a web a shortener. That's what bit.ly is, a URL shortener. But that it should take you to the Consumer Reports Password Manager article. And if perchance it tells you that you have to have a subscription to get in, I apologize. At the time that I checked it, it was freely accessible. So if you can't get to it, do as Patty was describing earlier, to go to Consumer Reports through your library's website and then search for Password Manager once you get to Consumer Reports through there, so that you can find their most recent reviews.
Okay, 2 more questions. We have one patron that asked, in the section on master account logins, what did MGF stand for? Is there any source we can go to for more details on this topic? Was that Microsoft, Google, Facebook?
Yeah, I was abbreviating instead of spelling them out again. Microsoft, okay. Google, and Facebook seem to be sort of the big 3 that are often offered for you to use that means of verifying yourself to log in to new accounts. You may encounter others. I think I've heard of LinkedIn being used. There may maybe there are some others that have become more common over the last couple of months, but these are the ones that I think you're most likely to see. So I was just abbreviating there.
Okay. And for the last question, you had mentioned the IDS fraud, and that was the largest one. That was the one that consumed the biggest news, all the fraudulent claims for the employment office. And we have a patron that was affected by this. And she wanted to know, what are all the steps to take? She freezed all, you contacted and freezed with all 3 credit bureaus, put alerts on the bank, contacted IDS, let them know, the IRS. I also, from what I understand, and Karen, you might chime in on this one too, contact the Attorney General's office for the state, the FTC. If you need that contact information, your local reference library, if you can't find it, please contact us and we'll share that with you. I know that some individuals contacted their local police department, and I have heard from other patrons that some police departments referred them back to the Attorney General's, and some police departments accepted their claim, depending on what community they were in. Your thoughts?
All of the above sound fine. I think the only thing you have to do is report it through the website for the Illinois Department of Employment Security, so that you will not be held responsible for the amount, nor will you be paying taxes on it. You don't want to get a 1099 next year saying that you're responsible for it in that way. I will tell you that I was disappointed when I was looking at this again, just in the last few days. I thought at this point I would be able to find, because it's been going on now for almost a year, right? Mm-hmm. I thought I would be able to find some firmer guidance about what specifically would help you prevent this type of identity theft. And I did not find that kind of information. It was all, not generic in a bad way, but the kinds of things you would do to prevent any kind of identity theft. Freezing the credit reports was at the top of the heap. I'm going to say that I'm not a fan of paid services to assist you with identity theft protection and that sort of thing. But if you've been involved in a breach and through that have access to what's usually a paid service to monitor your information on the dark web and that sort of thing. You may have it through, you may also have access to dark web monitoring through, through your antivirus software or things like that. If you're getting notices that logins from various accounts of yours are showing up on the dark web, it's kind of hard to make it actionable information because typically they don't tell you, they'll tell you like this username and a password associated with this showed up somewhere, but you don't really know exactly like what account that was and so forth. You may need to begin going through accounts and setting up new, unique, more difficult passwords. I really can't stress enough the importance of having unique passwords on any account that matters. What doesn't matter? If I log in so I can see an article on a professional publication, that there's no information there. You know, it's just a login and password. If I use that same password to log into a couple of other professional publications or something else that I read on occasion, maybe Grandma's Pecan Pies, I'm not too worried about that as long as Grandma's Pecan Pies doesn't have much information about me. But as soon as I start talking about social media accounts, financial accounts, Social Security logins, login for your apps where you freeze and unfreeze your credit reports, anything that's tied in with personal identifiable information, particularly financial and social media, because they have so much information about us, those all really have to be unique. So that if somebody gets into one of them, even if they learn something about you there, they're not going to be able to turn around and go hack into 3 other accounts just by assuming or playing around with a similar password. That's the real danger here, I think.
Well, Karen, thank you so very much. I think you covered a great deal of ground. I especially appreciate, you know, the quizzes that we're so kind of lured and enchanted by on social media. You know, what kind of car did you drive or this or that? And you know, you start going down this nostalgic memory lane, and before you know it, you've given away bits and pieces of your history that someone else can cobble together and use to claim your identity when we just thought it was a very harmless game.
Exactly.
So if you have any questions in regards to that, to our patrons, please, your reference librarians at our library, at your home library, we are here to address your concerns, your questions, to look up issues in greater detail with substantial and credible sources for you. So Karen, really, thank you so very much for joining us again and coming back to help us launch our spring program.
My pleasure.
And to all of our patrons tonight, I do want to say thank you so very much for making time to attend tonight's library program. And if you have suggestions about topics that you would like to see covered in this particular area of business, finance, and job and career searching, please do direct them to me. I take some of my best ideas from patron requests. And if there's something that you would like to have covered, I will do my very best to see that we can find an expert in this particular area to bring this to you. So Karen, again, thank you. Have a lovely spring.
Thank you. You too.
Enjoy. Take care, everyone.